Science, technology, and innovation are a few terms that are often connected with what we call development. How did India become a scientific superpower? What should the current generations do to achieve a sustainable yet smarter future? Over the past few decades, how have been the trends of inquisitiveness in students? Is the skills development in India enough to meet the demands of tomorrow? These are a few questions that we'll try to know the answers of through today's panel discussion. For the same, we are very fortunate to have with us three eminent personalities of the pharma domain who are scientists, educators, and pioneers in their fields as well. They're creating their own legacy in their respective frontiers, and so, of course, their experiences and opinions will surely help us understand the stance of science, technology, and research in India. On behalf of ACS BCB Student Chapter, I, Sakshi Kasat, welcome our panelists for today's discussion. Professor Mangal Nagarasenkar, Professor Mala Menon, and Professor Evans Coutinho. I welcome you all. For a detailed introduction to our panelists for today, I would like to invite Pravajja Vaddikar. Please, Pravajja.
I welcome you all again on behalf of ACS BCP Student Chapter. So, introducing our first panelist for today, we have Dr. Mangal Nagarsenkar, currently Emeritus Professor and former Head, Department of Pharmaceutics, Bombay College of Pharmacy. She has 34 years of experience in design and formulation of nanosystems and controlled release systems for oral, parenteral, topical, pulmonary, and ophthalmic routes and gene delivery. She pursued her pharmacy education and her PhD from Mumbai University. She is a member of the editorial board of Indian Journal of Pharmaceutical Sciences, has authored more than 100 research papers, both national and international, 8 review articles, and has presented at various national and international conferences. She has been granted 2 Indian patents, 3 trademarks, and 1 US patent has also been approved to her credit. Her awards include Professor M.L. Khurana Best Research Paper Award, Association of Pharmaceutical Teachers of India, APTI, Dr. Mrs. Manjushri Pal Best Researcher Award, and AMRF Best Researcher Award, to name a few. She is currently in collaboration with esteemed Indian and international organizations such as ACTREC, Navi Mumbai, SETGS Medical College and KM Hospital, Mumbai, Bhabha Atomic Research Center, Trombay, Mumbai, University of Finland, University of Helsinki, Finland, and FS University of Jena, Germany. I welcome Dr. Professor Nagasenkar. So, talking about our next panelist, Professor Mala Menon is currently Adjunct Professor, Department of Pharmaceutics, Bombay College of Pharmacy. She has 34 years of experience in teaching. She has completed her graduation, that is B.Pharm, her master's, that is M.Pharm, and PhD in pharmaceutics from the University of Mumbai. Her research interest lies in the area of conventional and novel type drug delivery systems, pulmonary and nasal delivery systems, novel vaccine delivery approaches, especially mucosal vaccines, probiotic formulations, and novel veterinary formulations. She has published 43 papers in peer-reviewed national and international journals and has been granted 1 patent to her credit. She has received several awards, including Dr. P.D. Patil Best Pharmaceutical Scientist Award, APTI Maharashtra branch at APTI Con, Association of Pharmacy Teachers of India, Best Professor in Pharmaceutics Award by ABP News Channel, Award from IPA ACG SciTech for Promising Innovation in Solid Dosage Forms, Distinguished Professor Award at Stakeholders Workshop held by National Science and Technology Management Information System, a division of DST, held at Smriti College of Pharmacy in Indore. Welcome, Professor Menon. So our next panelist, Professor Coutinho, did his BSc Tech, MSc Tech, and PhD Tech from the University Department of Chemical Technology (UDCT), University of Mumbai, which is currently known as the Institute of Chemical Technology, Mumbai. He is a renowned scientist and teacher in pharmacy education and has taught at Bombay College of Pharmacy for more than 2 decades and as visiting faculty at several well-known organizations. His interest lies in the area of NMR of peptides, strategic design of anti-infective agents using computer-assisted tools for drug design, and published 170 papers in peer-reviewed national and international journals. He has also been invited to over 100 various conferences to speak. He has also been granted a patent to his credit. He has received many national and international awards, which include University Grants Commission Research Award, Career Award for Young Teachers, AICTE, PAMDAL Best Teacher Award for Pharmacy Colleges in Bombay, Dr. M.K. Rangnekar Memorial Bronze Prize, the Professor M.L. Khurana Memorial Prize, the Professor J.G. Kane Memorial Prize, the Mrs. R.B. Foster Book Prize, to name a few. I welcome all of the panelists and let us begin with the discussion.
Thank you, Pravija, for introducing to our eminent speakers and panelists of today. So let's begin with the discussion. Since you all are pioneers in your own fields over many decades, you might have observed changing modes of education, shifting paradigms, and so many developments. We would like to know about your journey from being undergraduate students, or let's say entering your fields, to becoming experts and experts in your fields, and also your inspiration in pursuing the same. Professor Nagarsenkar, would you like to go first?
Oh, sure. If I have to say how I entered in pharmacy, it was not really a very conscious decision like students or you all are doing now. It was more by elimination. You'll be surprised to know that. But at that time, I didn't have really marked going to engineering or medicine as my ambition. Though I had marks to get into top school for medicine, but I was not deciding for it. I was actually thinking about which subjects I should follow further for my studies, and just got to know by coincidence about this upcoming course of pharmacy and its scope and opportunities, and decided to take it up. So it's quite by coincidence. But into this pharmacy course, I actually never looked back. I enjoyed every bit of it and loved everything that I learned about pharmacy. I did my graduation and post graduation, that is master's, from UDCT, that is today's Institute of Chemical Technology. I would say that teachers in UDCT, my teachers, have really left a deep impression on me. To name a few: Professor Pradhan, Dr. Deshpande, Dr. Parmeshwaran, Madam Vaichwal. Not only that I learned subject from them, but also their dedication, their thoughtfulness, their concern towards teachers and thinking. In lab, we were guided by three more madams: Madam Warrior, Madam Furnace, and Kamala Madam. Afterwards, I joined Bombay College of Pharmacy. It was like Dr. Tipnis was the guiding light, and he was my guide also for a doctorate. So thereafter, it was main inspiration from reading a lot of work which is reported by renowned scientists like Professor Robinson, all professors, Gordon Amidon, Professor Leslie Bennett, Baron Holtz, A.T. Florence. Some of them I could meet, which was really inspiring, and many I heard at their conferences, their presentations, and reading their work very carefully. And also, I should say that I must not forget mentioning my colleagues, interaction with them, and some of them collaborated with me, or I collaborated with them, the way you want to put it. That includes Dr. Coutinho for some small molecular dynamics work of our project, or Dr. Jatta for a lot of pharmacology work. And also, I think to contribute whatever I could do in a small way in profession. It was also long brainstorming sessions that I had with my students. So it is all concoction of everything that gets me here, I would say. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Nagarsenkar. Professor Malamenan, we would like to know your journey.
Yeah, I think uh, my journey is, at the beginning, it's very similar to what Dr. Nagarsenkar has mentioned. I think at that time, when I passed out, I was in the first batch of the 10 plus 2. Okay, I think now we have there was the last batch of 11th SSC and the first batch of 10th SSC. Okay, so uh, what happened was 11th we had in school, in 12th we went to college. And in that particular year, we had the 11th batch passing out inter science, 11th SSE batch, and the 10th standard. So we were in the 12th HSE. So there were double the number of students who were passing out. Okay, so you can imagine the scenario of, everybody wants to get into some professional courses, even for BScs, and there was a lot of confusion about how the admission procedures would be held. Of course, we didn't have any CET or any other such exams in those days. It was purely based on our 12th standard score, that is the HSC score or your inter science score. So then there were a lot of delays, and in the end, they came out with a formula: 55% of the seats uh, for all the professional colleges would go to the uh, inter science students, and 45 would go to the 10th, the 12th HSC group, right? That was how they divided. Uh, so in that respect, again, I had aspired for medicine, but in that 55% of the seats are not available to us. So I did not get it in that first round. Then looking at other courses, then pharmacy came in. Pharmacy at that time, I knew only of ICT, that is UDCT in those days. I went to UDCT and applied, and somebody said there is a college in Kalina, and that's how I came to BCP, filled up the form. And again, there were 2-3 rounds. I got the admission in the third round or so. And that year, instead of, we were a small class of only 30 students. So that year, they increased the seats to 40. And again, the class was a mixed. 55% were those who had come from the 11th SSE or the inter science group, and 45% from the 12th HSE. So we had a mixed crowd. So there were a lot of discussions about how to go about the syllabus. But once I joined, then I think it was a very good journey where the subjects were interesting. In those days, we had a 3-year BPharm course, unlike the 4-year. But the subjects were interesting, and it was related to medicine. So it was always a good thing. We had subjects, we were learning about medicine, and we were all enthusiastic. And our professors, Dr. Tipnis from the chemistry department, then Dr. Balla, the late Dr. Damle, uh, we had Dr. Vishwanathan. So a lot of good teaching in those days, and the basics we picked up very fast. And I think after BPharm, now in those not have the stress that students have today. We were not so much worried about percentage or how much we would get. At the end of BPharm, we smoothly sailed over and we went into MPharm. Okay. Now, MPharm, when we joined, my guide was Dr. Balla. Uh, so Dr. Balla was, he is a person who is very, he always experiments with new topics, new subjects. So when everyone was working with tablets and conventional topics, he spoke to me, and I had a colleague and friend, Dulari. Both of us had joined under him. And he said, why not, would you like a new topic altogether? And he spoke about radiation sterilization, feasibility of radiation sterilization. Now, there was no one else who had worked on these this topics, but we were excited, both of us, and we had a lot of collaboration with BARC, the ISOMED, which is the radiation sterilization plant at Trombay. So we had to, take our formulations there, get them irradiated. Another plus, very good point about Dr. Balla. He introduced us to the scientists there, uh, and we were free to discuss with them. So that gave us, one more advisor sort of. We learned a lot of things from. There was one Dr. Gopal, Dr. NGS Gopal, who was a very great scientist. Uh, so we had discussions with him. Whole day we used to spend with him, discussing about various topics, and the work went off very smoothly. Now after MPharm, I had a short stint in the industry. Okay, I worked as an apprentice in In those days, it was Hext Pharma, Hext India Limited. And I worked for about almost a year at Glaxo India, which is now GSK, right? All those mergers and acquisitions. That really helped, that industrial experience helped me a great deal, while teaching pharmaceutics. Now, after that, some experience in industry, I felt I want to do my PhD. Came back to teaching. A short duration I taught at SNDT for 1.5 years, CU Shah College of Pharmacy. But there at that time, they did not have enough of the PhD and all had not still started. So then moved over to BCP, and there it still took some time. I started teaching, and within about 2 years registered for PhD. So we have, I think Dr. Nagarsekar also had the same experience. We all have done our teaching job and the PhD side by side. And I think it took me about 8 years or more to complete my PhD along with the teaching, but it was worth it. And as Dr. Nagarsekar said, we had a good collaboration in the college. A lot of us teachers and also the PG students helping each other. And again, as Dr. Jagtap and Dr. Suman Mahajan, I mean, they were instrumental during my PhD. They have supported me a great deal, advised me a great deal in my animal studies. Further, then after completing PhD, the next step started where we all of us had to register as MPharm teachers, and we had so many students working under us for MPharm, subsequently for PhD. And again, there we learned a lot from our students. I can actually list out, some of the students who have really, it was a learning together, the student and the we as the guide, and it was extremely interesting. And now all those students are uh, in various jobs at high places in the industry, and it is a great pleasure for us, for me as a teacher, to know that they are doing very well in the profession. Uh, I think there are some few students who I can remember Rita Cardoza. She told me something once, which she said, the work expands with time. Because I know that each time you try to do, then it doesn't get completed until the end of the thesis. You are still, there is some work and you are still writing. I remember Deepak Singh and Jayesh Parmar. They are the pioneers in inhalation drug delivery system in the lab. Further to that, the current students now, they are continuing the work. Tuberculosis, I would say Rajesh was the first person who started it. So again, all these are good memories, and we are still learning, experimenting, and that is a great feeling. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Mala Menon. One thing I would like to say is about your generations is uh, the tendency to acknowledge. That is what we learn the most from your generations. Thank you for sharing your journey. Now, Professor Coutinho, we would like to know how you went from NMR to molecular modeling.
Okay, so you don't want to hear my story, how I started with my undergraduate to my PhD. You want to hear from NMR to molecular modeling. Okay.
No,
No, it's okay. But to connect that, I think I have to go back a few steps. And how did my interest in NMR and molecular modeling was kindled in me. So before that, I go back a few years to my education at UDCity. And as Dr. Nagarsekar has already pointed out, there were two stalwarts in the chemistry department at that time, Professor R.P. Iyer and Professor Pradhan. They were astounding chemists. And the way they taught us made us think it was very natural for us to gravitate chemistry and to develop a love for chemistry and all things that is related to chemistry. And they somehow instilled such a strong passion for chemistry that, sad to say, that other subjects like pharmaceutics and pharmacology were actually relegated to the background, which now I very, very sorely regret of not having put enough of hard work in these areas. But somehow, because of these two great personalities, we had this one-sided view that chemistry was everything, and chemistry was everything in life, which is also true. And that, is what actually drove me to actually pursue some research work in chemistry. When I started to embark on my PhD program, I had several options. One is to continue with synthetic chemistry that I did in Udacity. And another area that was just beginning to be heard and felt was NMR. Okay. The higher dimensions of NMR came into being from 1D to 2D to 3D and 4D. And I had attended some workshops in Tata Institute of Fundamental Research, and I began to see that the higher dimensions actually could open up new vistas in structure determination, in structure elucidation, and in understanding mechanisms. And that is what intrigued me, that 2D and 3D and 4D NMR and also multi-nuclear NMR from the proton to 13C to 31P to phosphorus and 19F fluorine actually could, unravel some of the things in biology and in chemistry that was not possible with earlier NMR techniques. And I was intrigued by this. And therefore I thought that let me pursue my research in NMR. And I was very fortunate to be associated with my mentor, Professor V.M. Kulkarni, who did one of his postdoctoral work at TIFR. And he introduced me to the group at TIFR who were actually using 2D and 3D NMR to solve structures of proteins and of DNA. Okay, those were actually out of bounds for me. So I actually thought that I would use 2D and 3D NMR to study about drugs, the structures of drugs, and their interactions with, model membranes that could be fabricated in the laboratory, and with very simple proteins. So I thought that with my basic knowledge, I may not be able to use my NMR to actually study the structure of large proteins or DNA, but I thought definitely that I could learn something and use it to understand about drugs, about their mechanism of action, their structures, their conformations, and their interaction with very simple membranes. So that is how my journey into NMR began. And from there, then, after having gained some expertise, some knowledge about how to use NMR to study small molecules, I decided to expand my scope of research into peptides. Okay, and then we started looking at peptides along with my research students, PhD research students. But one of the key things is after you establish a structure by NMR, you need actually to use molecular modeling techniques to get a full insight into the three-dimensional structure of your molecules, because NMR can actually only cover a very small fraction of the degrees of freedom. For example, NMR cannot reveal the bond lengths or even the bond angles. By multidimensional NMR and multinuclear NMR, one can only determine the dihedral angles and can actually determine the distances between protons, okay, the through space interactions, but you are not able actually to determine bond lengths and bond angles. So this thing is missing in NMR. Okay. So that must be supplemented by molecular modeling techniques. And that's how I got into molecular modeling, to use molecular modeling in order to be able to determine the complete structure of molecules, of proteins, of peptides, and of small molecules, that one needs to supplement it with molecular modeling techniques. And that's how actually I got into the field of molecular modeling. So with this beginnings, we then started doing much more in molecular modeling. My students and I, then we embarked upon doing dynamics, doing pharmacophore modeling, doing quantum mechanical calculations. I started actually to work with my students, and that was a fascinating journey. Right up till my retirement, I continued to do that work. So that is my story about how I got into NMR and in the field of molecular modeling.
Thank you so much, Dr. Evans Coutinho. Your passion reflects from your words, for sure. And thank you so much to all the panelists for sharing your journeys. I'm sure the audience would definitely learn from what you all have said through your stories.
Hearing about all your journeys was quite inspiring. So that also makes me feel like new generations, including us, have become more passive when it comes to putting efforts into our work, whether it's reading, literature studies, or working in labs. What are your thoughts on this, Professor Nagasinkar?
Well, not really, but there is definitely good scope for improvement. I'm saying I don't feel exactly like what you said, that today's students are very passive or not putting in a lot of efforts, because I have known many students, many of my students, recent and past, have been very hardworking. They were focused on their course uh, because I think they put their studies and research on high priority, and they were absolutely interested in it. If I look at changing generation, maybe today's students, I feel students are very smart, innovative, less hesitant. But maybe the approach of students today has changed, possibly because of pressures of competition in entrance exams, maybe admissions, jobs, etc. These could be the reasons, but I do feel that students should give importance to their undergraduate studies, and that is going to be a foundation for their profession, and not to neglect it just because its importance may not be 100% for next admission. I feel that could be the reason the focus changes, and therefore not enough efforts can be put in when it comes to lab, when it comes to reading. My piece of advice would be, don't get deflected from the primary purpose of your course, that is to learn, to have knowledge and skills basic for your profession. I would love to see hardworking and self-disciplined students, but as a teacher, I think I wouldn't like to burden students by saying that they must work hard. A part of it has to come from within. And also, I'm not so much for forcing them to follow strict discipline. It has to be a combination of set of rules for lab and class, and a lot of self-discipline from within. So that is how I feel, my view on it. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for the insight. We'll definitely keep it in mind.
Also, adding on to what Pravaja asked, how has the graph of intuitiveness and innovation in students changed over time, according to you, Professor Mala, or has it been constant?
I think no, I would echo some of the feelings of Dr. Nagarsenkar. Today, the students, I mean, they have too many things they are focusing on. For example, when you're doing your B.Pharm, you're also at the same time, you are thinking of the future. Some students want to go abroad. some want to do MPharm. I think the system itself is geared that way. You need to write a GPAT, or those who are aspiring for management. No, so side by side, you're doing too many things, and hence there is a dilution. So the BPharm or your basic concepts are sometimes not strong. So the innovation part, what people are trying to do is a quick work, something you get information from here and there. And today there is no dearth of information. Think what is there is so much of information in the internet, in the various websites, but the problem is how to filter all that and make meaningful conclusions. This is a great task, and that is missing quite often. And I think when, as students, sometimes you would need someone to mentor you, someone to help you in that, someone senior, and that is sometimes missing. So what happens is the innovation part is something quick, not much depth is sometimes seen in the innovation. Although there are students who are very good, who would really go into depth. So you see all types of students. Some students really go into the depth. They can answer, say once you exhibit an innovation or present it, when you ask detailed questions or basic questions, often there is a gap. So that is something which needs to be covered by the students. The basic concepts are often not clear. That is the impression that I have been having. Okay.
Yeah, thank you
Yeah.
so much, Professor Mala.
Yeah.
I totally understand your point.
Yeah.
There is a
As well as
diversity.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am, go ahead.
Yeah, I think this may be a bit critical, but then I think that is how probably we have to, and there are very few students who go into the depth. That is what I've observed. Also, when I think job wise and all that, uh, students are always looking for something very easy, even MPharm and all that, something very easy going, which they don't want to take up challenges quite often. Uh, this is what is the observation which I've had, in maybe this has happened, in the last say about 4 to 5 years, where probably it's a system which is working. The system is fast paced. You need to do so many things, and too many things are expected uh, from you. Sometimes the parents also are, the trying to maybe put things in their perspective, and all this creates a lot of confusion which should not be there. I mean, we have to often the students are not in the present. Okay, you're always thinking of the future, what so that is one thing which you work hard in the present. It may sound a little old time, but in the present you focus on the present, then your future is assured. This is the principle that I have. So probably that is what is should be the message to the students, current students also. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
thank you.
Yeah, we should try to stay at the maximum of focusing more on learning and being more
Learning.
in the present.
So, Professor Coutinho, this brings me to another question. Is it necessary that one should always have some motive, some interest, or a reason to pursue a subject in order to become an expert in that particular area in the future? So, is it a prerequisite according to you?
Okay. Mm. If you want to excel in an area, in any area, according to me, I feel you should have a passion. And if you have a passion, it is that what drives you. And you can surmount any barriers. But if you do not have this passion and, this is lacking, I feel you'll just sail along and sort of just imbibe whatever comes upon your way without going outside, learn more, expand your horizon, and grasp as much as possible. So if you want to succeed, I feel, in my opinion, okay, that's what I feel, it's a real passion that drives you. And I would see that in, many of our teachers and many of my colleagues, for example, even with Dr. Nagasekar, Dr. Mala, Dr. Aarti Jagtap, and many other people who actually excelled in this field, I see in them a real passion. And that is what actually got them to the heights that which they have earned today. To the standing they are, to the respectability that they have in society about their awards and their work and their research and their papers. This is what has actually propelled them to those heights. So my advice to students is, do whatever is your passion, and I'm sure you will excel. I was so passionate after I came to know about a little bit about NMR that it actually took, and I was just taken over. I was bored, head over heels about NMR, and to see that the limitless things that you could do with this methodology, I was just gripped with it, and that is what actually took me to study further. Surmount all obstacles. I like to say that the things that I learned, that I did in my NMR, I was never taught in my undergraduate studies. For example, I did quantum mechanical calculations, okay, and some of them at a quite high level, which I was never taught in my undergraduate years. Okay, I never had an exposure. Nobody taught me what a 2-dimensional and a 3-dimensional NMR is, but I was passionate to learn it at whatever is going to cost me. And you must appreciate that NMR has very deep theoretical concepts. Some of them are based in actually quantum chemistry. And, as students, we are hardly exposed to quantum chemistry. So in order to do some amount of research work in NMR or even in molecular modeling, you actually have to grapple with this very tough area of quantum chemistry. Quantum chemistry is actually, people a lot of shudder. You just talk to any chemistry student, an MSc or a PhD chemistry student, and you just utter the word quantum chemistry, he will shudder with it. Because it's an area that is highly, very abstract, highly mathematical, very complicated mathematical concepts and theories and ideas. People just shudder and think, oh, quantum chemistry, that is not an area for me. And many times, when I talk a little bit about my work in quantum chemistry, people are amazed that, I've gone to conferences and in workshops, and I've talked a little bit about my work in quantum chemistry. Many of them are actually surprised, and they ask me this question: you are a pharmacist, you're not actually a true chemist, and how come you have managed to do some work in quantum chemistry? I just laugh at them. I know deep down, I know that it was my passion and my enthusiasm that actually drove me to work in these areas. So I say the same thing today, and I tell all my students that if you have a passion, there's no obstacle. Okay, your passion will actually take you over all obstacles. And that's what's going to really keep you excelling and master that area and do some very great research work in that area. So that is my take on this subject.
Thank you so much, Professor Coutinho. I remember you talking on, I guess, Independence Day about how you had to struggle to get books to study from the IIT Bombay library. Can you just talk about it a bit?
Okay, so to continue with this, now, in those days, to learn about NMR, 2D, 3D NMR, and about molecular modeling and quantum chemistry, we had no books available with us. Okay, at the BCP, there were hardly any books where I could actually learn the basic concepts of in these areas. So where to go? And in those days, access to the internet and the amount of resources that was available on the internet were very limited. Today, actually, you can just Google NMR and molecular modeling, and I think you can get 1 million papers, both elementary and very advanced treatise of these subjects. But in those days, there were, no such resources easily available to us. So the only thing was to get your hands on some books or some journals where this was being actually treated. And where to go to? The two libraries that were close to us were either UDCity or to IIT. And the closest was actually UDCity. And I remember there I went and took, a regular pass to go and visit the UDCity library and sit there, And because I was a past student, I somehow got a regular pass to visit and to also to Xerox, to photocopy articles from that. And IIT was quite out of way and out of reach. And the few times that I went to IIT library, I found them to be very reserved, the librarian to be very reserved and not very welcoming, to outsiders in order to use their resources. They would always put an obstacle. Why are you coming here? And don't you have a good library? And some sort of excuse just to prevent us from coming. And then they would ask us, why doesn't your institution take a, take a this to, for your students? Then it was not possible that the BCP would take an institutional admission for all students to go and visit the library and use the books or to this out there. So it was not possible. So somehow through friends, I had some friends at the chemistry department of IIT. Some I was to approach them for some articles, which they used to oblige sometimes and not many times. But the best way of accessing information in those days was through UDCity library. And slowly I came to know that the library at the university also had some articles and some books and some journals in NMR and molecular modeling. So I went and actually also, got myself admitted into the library by paying a very small fee. In those days, it was just 100 rupees an admission fee, and I could access the books and the resources out there. And that was very close to Bombay College of Pharmacy. I used to visit the university library more often than UDCity. So slowly, my path changed from UDCity to the university library, and then I cut off myself from the IIT library because of their behavior. And I found that UDCity and IIT libraries provided sufficient amount of information for me to read and to learn about this, about NMR and molecular modeling. I felt that there was enough of resources, and also for a small amount of payment, I could actually Xerox and photocopy a lot of articles and and the books that were out there. And so that is how I got access to these to resources. So yeah, what I said about it, I think I may have said a little bit about IIT libraries in my talk with you all, but actually I should say that the greater availability was the resources at UDCity and at the university campus.
That was really insightful and inspiring, sir. You must find your passion, and it must drive you and be your guiding force regarding what you want to pursue in the future. And this really puts things into perspective for me, and I'm sure it will also help me and our listeners to decide what subject we must pursue in our post graduation and for our further studies and endeavors. Thank you, sir.
On the basis of what I have observed, I think undergraduate research is not widely established in especially Indian pharmacy institutes. Is it true, Professor Malamanan? And if yes, do you think research should be encouraged at the undergraduate level?
At undergraduate level, the students are still learning, right? There are a lot of new concepts to be learned, and you have the practicals. The research should be there. Research has to be encouraged. It is there in many universities. And I think it has also now started in Mumbai University. I think since last year or the year before last, the new syllabus, there is a research component introduced where we are having groups of students who are who form a team and they work on a project. I have observed that students are very much interested in doing research because I think whenever there are always students, especially from third year and final year, who come down and they say that they want to do a research project. They want to assist, maybe work with some MPharm student or a PhD student, get an insight into what is research. Also, we have in Mumbai University the uh, Avishkar and all these platforms where students are encouraged to do research, even at the UG level. So that is another avenue where students can pursue their research. I think the major problem now when undergraduates doing research, there are huge numbers, right? We have a strength of uh, 60 students, and managing them to do the research, the resources for it, the space for it, right? All these become a little difficult. In a practical, you have a group of 30 and we conduct the practicals, right? But when you want to do a research project, it is something that you have to do on your own with the support of maybe some seniors. Often there are issues like safety, because when you're doing a work, you need to understand the safety aspects. So sometimes these things uh, come in the way. Uh, I remember there were students who have come to me, and there was one student whom I had given a project of something. It was uh, related to some using waste material and converting them into proteins. And one MPharm student had done some such work. He had explored.
So we could now give them an opportunity to do anything, whatever is in their interest. Maybe go out and work in the industry, maybe do some field work or something, or we could ask them, can you tell us what interests you, what is your passion, and what you want to do, and let them spend time doing whatever they feel that they would like to do. So what I'm trying to say is, I don't think we should force research on every student, especially in their undergraduate years. And why I say this, because I can see that a lot of students who even come into the MPharm program are primarily coming not because of a love for research, but they're coming into the MPharm program primarily to enhance their educational qualifications, and so that they can get a better job, or for some other deeper reasons or some other motives out there, which I don't want to get into it. And I've seen this in my 34 years at Bombay College of Pharmacy. I've seen that everybody who comes into the master's program is really not passionate about doing research. Their whole intention in doing a master's program is that I will get a better job than if I had a plain bachelor's degree. I just want to embellish my CV with a master's degree, and I feel that I'll be one off over the bachelor student, and possibly I'll be the first one who will be chosen by the industry because I have a master's degree, and I will be paid a slightly higher salary than I would get if I had only had a bachelor's degree, just a bachelor's degree only. So I think we should, about all Dr. Mala Menon has said, I fully endorse and agree with her. Okay, but my opinion on this is that we should segregate those who have a genuine interest for research and provide all the facilities and for them to carry out research, whether in the college or elsewhere, and let the other students find their path. Of course, the college is there to help them to find out what they want to do other than research. So that is my take on this subject.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
agree with
yeah.
you, Dr. Coutinho. And I also think, in addition to research, I think how to document it, the integrity when you're doing research, how you present your results, all these also should be a part of the learning when they do their research activities. So as Dr. Coutinho said, maybe surveys or some such things which the student is interested in, and how we will represent it, how we will prepare the report. All these things are also should be part and parcel of the project.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Uh,
I too agree with both of them, and I agree with Dr. Putino more specifically, thinking that not everybody is really inspired to do research. Not everybody wants to do experimental research. Some people are not so much good at lab work, and they really do not have that aptitude for research. So just because it is mandatory, then they have to do that part, and it is also others have to also put in that much of energy to get the work done. Maybe because it is mandatory, then it could be limited to small experiments, which can give them some confidence of doing something on their own, or maybe some surveys to get meaningful results. But I agree with the thought that we would be able to segregate those who are really deeply interested in research, and maybe they could be given much more leverage in doing this work or in guidance from experts in the institute, outside the institute, so that they can pursue it in much better way. Yeah, that's my thought on it.
yeah. Thank you so much. This was really an eye opening discussion and a very important factor that might have been missed out.
So, Professor Nagasinkar, taking this discussion to a different note regarding the COVID-19 situation. So, in these unprecedented times, how has technology and innovation bridged the gap in terms of access to education? What are your thoughts on this? Is there a downside to this situation?
Oh, this crisis of pandemic has really challenged our conventional system, maybe the classrooms that we usually have in uh, institutes, colleges. I mean, the studies in the classroom or the experimentation in lab, maybe the role of teachers, and also traditional method that we followed most of the time of teaching. I remember actually when I heard about this lockdown and pandemic, I was in Frankfurt, Germany, and their lockdown started a bit earlier. I saw that universities kept on working there. Possibly their problems were different, and I was all the time thinking that if it happens back in Mumbai, how are we going to cope up with? How will people just sit at home, not able to travel to colleges, and how would they then continue with their education, examination, classrooms, labs, etc. And I remembered at that time, about 5, 6 years back, that means for quite some time, I've been hearing global courses which are around, and mainly I was reading through global courses of Harvard Medical School, that they have these online classes internationally being conducted, but they couple it with some workshops which are physically conducted. And then I started feeling that maybe we might find some new ways of coping up with situation. And by the time I returned in June, some mid of June, I found that students were able to access the education through various platforms like Google Meet, Teams, Zoom. You all know your classes are going on. Your lab instructions are also going on. And I could see some advantages, of course, very good advantages, and that is one can join the classes from wherever they are. You save a lot of time. You don't have to travel. Also, it is quite comfortable, very flexible. Uh, but I mean, there are other aspects also to it, that as a teacher, when I am conducting the classes, I feel I have to have class material much more structured and always think about what would I do if some feature doesn't work? What is the alternative that I have? And also I need facilities, and as a receiver, student also needs certain facilities, say phone, a laptop, internet, etc. And on the downside, I was feeling that though it is flexible and you can do it from wherever you are, there is some kind of involuntary encroachment of personal space, maybe. And in the sense that if I'm taking classes, and even if I have my video on, students are not so much enthusiastic for keeping, they're reluctant to put their videos on. And sometimes I have felt that without students putting their videos on and simply answering, their answer also unmuting and then answering. So that brings some kind of lag, and then I miss the live discussions that otherwise you can have in class, or what students can grasp from even the body language while teaching is going on. So there is that missing element of physical or offline teaching. Sometimes I feel, is there enough attention as I could get in the physical classes, offline mode of teaching, or is retaining knowledge also to the same level? And I'm sure that these things also can be taken care of. There would be more innovation into it, some new sets of rules or new features. But sometimes I felt that keeping video on would be very good for better interaction. And also I feel that, say, it's not just education, it is also examination. When there is evaluation, also you have new set of rules. And I see that faculty or the coordinators have really been thoughtful to come up with rules of set of rules which consider both students and teachers, and to see that the exams are fair and teaching is also good. So yes, there are quite a few advantages and also some limitations I feel, but the important point is education has not come to halt. It continued, and it continued to a significant extent, although it is not 100% as we could do otherwise, but to a very, very significant interest. So in that sense, the technology and innovation has really bridged the gap. I'm very happy about it.
Absolutely, ma'am. Absolutely agree. And there are flip sides to this side as well, and you have explained it perfectly well.
Yeah, I would like to know the thoughts of the experiences of Professor Coutinho and Professor Mala Menon in the teaching.
So I think the COVID-19 situation has taught us many lessons. The first is that for many of us, this was something really new, which we had to adapt into a completely different environment. I had given some online lectures at a few places and all, but never in this fashion where, for hours together and for so many days, you had to lecture to your students on an online platform. I always used to joke to my students that I am now talking from a physical class to my glass. I should tell that I'm talking to the glass now. And it was not easy to begin with, because I had to learn a lot, especially how to use technology, even though I was quite familiar with the use of the computer, but it was a completely different element using any one of these platforms, whether it was Microsoft Teams or Google or WebEx or Zoom or whatever platform. There was a bit of a learning to be done, because you are trying to impart some education along, just not talk. So when we are on a platform, it is just not giving some sermon and just talking and philosophizing about things and about that. You are actually trying to impart some education to your students out here. So to use that technology and to use all the tools that are available on that platform very judiciously, and to this maximum potential, so that all that you are trying to imbibe and to impart into your students is actually transmitted and communicated very effectively, so that at the other end, behind the glass, your students are able to actually get what you're trying to say. Okay, so on my part, it took some time to learn how to effectively use these tools so that, I could actually do it in a very similar way that I was doing it in a physical classroom. One of the problems in doing an online teaching is basically you're not able to judge the students' reaction, and you're not able to judge whether they are grasping what you're trying to communicate, whether they're able to understand, or whether there is a very passive response on the other end, whether there is an active learning on the other end, or they're just sitting with their mind somewhere else in space. So that feedback, that tactile feedback which used to get from students in a physical classroom was actually missing. And one of the things that that a feedback actually does is actually gives the teacher some impetus to either alter his line of teaching, or to teach in a more enthusiastic way, or to explain it in a slightly different way. That is actually missing. I remember often sitting with Dr. Krishna Iyer, and we used to always say that no 2 successive years for the same class actually we have taught in the very same fashion. Our teaching has always hinged upon how is the student's response. If we have got a very enthusiastic response from the class, then we would always add a little more depth of knowledge, a little more teaching, a little more extra beyond the curriculum. We would always try to impart to such a student. But if we did not get a very positive vibe from the students, and we did not get a positive feedback from the students, but a very dull response, we would actually cut short and limit ourselves to what the syllabus wants us to do, never going beyond the delivery of the syllabus, and trying to engage the student into very thoughtful dialogues, and trying to go beyond what the syllabus actually prescribes out here. So in an online teaching, this tactile response which comes back from students via their expressions, their body language, and of course their verbal clues, which actually helps the teacher to teach in a slightly different way, is completely eliminated in an online teaching work. And for this reason, I find that the online teaching, while it has some advantages, as Dr. Nagarsekar rightly pointed out, that students can actually attend your class from anywhere out in the world. They can listen to you from anywhere out in the world. But I don't feel that there is really effective communication and effective teaching being established in such a mode. I think it cannot, and it will never replace a physical class, an offline teaching mode out there. We'll never be able to reach that level of what is a teaching as we do it in the classroom out here. And there are things sometimes which a chalk and talk or the blackboard is actually mandatory. For example, trying to do an online teaching with mathematics concepts or even with organic chemistry concepts is just nigh impossible. You can teach many other concepts very easily using your PowerPoint slides or some other mode of presentation. But to teach organic chemistry reactions, or to teach, for example, how you derive a formula and how you solve a problem in mathematics, it is impossible to do it, to do it in an online teaching mode. So, online teaching has certain advantages, but for some subjects, it is just no. You have to be there in the classroom, and you have to use the chalk and talk method in order to be able to effectively communicate and transmit your information to the students out there. Okay, so I'm thankful that technology has come to the rescue in these times, that we are actually able to do some teaching online. But I feel that we should quickly revert back to the classroom. And I think it is definitely enjoyable for both for the teacher. And I think as many students would echo this same thought that yes, the offline teaching mode, the classroom is really an enjoyable experience out here. The only thing I know, students, they can't hide from the eye of the teacher while they are in the classroom. They can't doze off. They can't eat their bel puri or their chicken curry while sitting in the classroom. And they can't chat while sitting in the classroom. Now, all that is possible in an online mode. You can doze off, you can go to sleep, you can put on your music behind you, you can have nice chicken tikka masala without your teacher ever knowing, and all that thing can be done. So I know for students, maybe they would still love to do the online mode, but I still think students would miss their companionship of their friends, sitting along with their friends and having nice fun in the classroom between the lectures. I think students are also missing that. But for teachers, I definitely think that nothing can replace the chalk and board and a physical communication in a classroom. I think the digital mode can no way compensate and can no way could replace that.
Absolutely, sir. There are pros and cons to both the things, and we as students definitely miss the interaction and the lively classroom atmosphere that we have with the professors here at BCP. So yeah, we would also love if things resume very quickly. Mala ma'am, would you like to talk about your experience, how it has been in the pandemic teaching to students via this online mode?
The points have already been covered by Dr. Nagarsenkar and Dr. Kutino, right? Those are the same points, right? There are pros and cons. And definitely the classroom teaching, the physical teaching is the most important. And we would prefer that. Right now in the pandemic, we are constrained, and this there is even though you have all these advanced systems of communication, there is still a gap. There is a barrier between the students and the teacher in this online mode. Another, as Dr. Kutino put it, the tactile responses. You can actually register whether a student. There are some students who nod their head. Some of them appear disinterested. Some may be doing something else, right? Or their mind is somewhere else. They're just physically present in the classroom. So that when it is registered, then we know. And as Dr. Kutino said, at the end of the lecture, I think we all teachers, we reflect, there is a reflection process going on. Did I deal with that point properly, or would the students have understood this? Now in the classroom, sometimes like now a student asks a doubt, right? Some point is not clear enough. Then we can think of some examples which we can give, some concrete example which will help them to understand. Now, such interactions are missing. I think now, even now, when I take online classes, I keep on asking, am I audible? Have you understood? Should I move to the next slide? I keep asking, and the students must be wondering why are these, repeatedly. But I still want to know whether they are with me, right? Whether they've understood. Is there some doubt? Uh, there is always that this is lingering in our mind because we cannot see the students face to face. Another point which comes to my mind is that we always tell the students that as the lecture is going on, as the teacher is speaking, or what is displayed on the PowerPoint or the slides, the student has to note down points in a notebook, right? So this will help them during the exams to prepare elaborate notes, or some more points. It will help them to read up what they have to look up. Now, I think in the last, as I've been saying initially also, in the last 5 to 6 years, I've observed that students are distracted. They may be, doing something else, maybe studying for their CET, or preparing labels for. I've actually caught students writing behind. They're writing their journals, completing their journals, because that they have to submit it during the practicals. So such things uh, we can keep a check. And basically, as I said, I will reiterate on that same point. I always have been telling the students, be in the present. So now you're attending a lecture, you please pay attention in the lecture, focus it, so that more than half of your work is done. You focus, listen, a lot of it is registered in your mind. So it makes your work easier later. Now in this online mode, we really do not know. I have been actually going around and checking out whether the students have written points, right? So then you find some students have not written down, right? So this is to help the students. Again, when you attend a seminar, when you know anywhere, writing down points wherever you are, jotting down points is very important, which will help you reflect later. Now all these things are missing when we give an online talk, online lecture, right? I can actually recollect some students. I do not know whether Dr. Nagarsenkar and Dr. Kutino would remember. There was this boy uh, who was there, Kare, right? He's now in ICT doing his PhD. He sits there and he shakes his head. You know that he's registering every point. His eyes are also sparkling. So there are some students who are registering the points and they are with the teacher. They are understanding every point. But some of them are not able to. There are a lot of students with language barriers, right? They are trained in the vernacular. So for them, English itself is difficult, and then you have to actually explain to them more elaborately. Now, all these things we are not able to make out in an online classroom. Okay, so we look forward to the offline mode where it is a physical classroom where the students are there. You can see the smiling faces of the students. Uh, some of the noise you make, the distractions, everything is, I think, part and parcel of the classroom. So there are pros and cons, but it is all enjoyable as a teacher. Uh, I think I also recollect one particular boy. Now there is always this issue of attendance, right? Uh, Now there was one boy. This was way back, maybe more than uh, 10 years or 15 years. This boy, when I called out his name, he said, "Madam, I was physically present but mentally absent." I was very upset. This boy's name was Rahul. I don't recollect his surname. I was very upset. I told him, "What do you mean by that? Are you trying to act smart?" Hmm? Uh, then later on, he came and he spoke to me, and he told me about how the entire education system uh, is futile, and so there were a lot of points which he brought out, and I think he's been thinking deep into what are the ills of our current education system. He says that everywhere, right from childhood, we are only told bring marks, get good marks. We are not told to learn uh, uh, or understand the subject. So there are some students I realized who actually are reflective, who are critical, and they're thinking, right? So I think I that is the example which I remember. So right now we really do not know. Physically also they may not be present, right? Just switched on, and they may be somewhere else doing something else. So that is the situation. So okay, uh, so we look forward to the uh, offline classroom.
Yeah, definitely, ma'am. We really look forward to
Yeah,
the offline
you are
world.
also missing. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so the next question uh, is to Professor Kutina. We have seen situations unfold, revealing newer technologies coming into the picture, ultimately creating demands for new skill development. For example, today every kid wants to learn coding and programming. So, do you think we as pharmacists are ready for the future where computers are anticipated as the rulers, or do we need to hasten up? And how can a UG student make sure that she or he keeps abreast with the novel technologies and develop those skills to be future ready as well?
Okay, so today the computer is becoming central in whatever we do, uh, in our personal life or whether in our secular life, uh, whether for enjoyment or wherever we go, we see that the computer now is the computer, I'm putting it up in quotes, and I hope you know what it means, is becoming very central in our functioning, in our everyday usage, to retrieve information, to access so many resources, you know, because the computer is now so central in our everyday life. I feel that as pharmacy students, we are somehow missing out on the basic knowledge about the computer, its operations, its working, and its functioning. We have one very small topic, or rather one subject in the first year, where we teach a little bit about the computer. Years back, I used to take this topic for the first year pharmacy students, and I was very surprised that when I asked students what is the operating system, when I asked them how many of you have a laptop or a computer in their home, and some of them would put their hands up, and I would ask them this question: can you tell me what is the configuration of your computers? And some of them would give me a very blank look. Some of them had heard this word about configuration, but they really didn't know what to say about about their computer. If I would ask them what is the operating system, some of them even didn't know what is many of them did not know to distinguish between the Windows operating systems and the Microsoft Office tools. Okay, some of them thought that those two was actually synonymous and one and the same thing. And I was very surprised about that. And they, would use the internet with a lot of chatting and for email, but never knew anything about the basic things of what was the hardware and how was the actually computer really operating, without even knowing what was the operating system that they had. And sometimes I would open the computer. I was fortunate to actually have some computers in my lab. I would open a computer and take out its part and actually show them and ask them, could you identify what is this? And I would take the motherboard to them and I would ask them, do you know where the RAM is, where the CPU is? And all of them would give me a very blank look. I would ask them, do you know the communication systems that are there inside the computers? And they would always give me a very, very blank look. What is a COM port? And what is a USB port? They would always give me a very, very blank look, without a clue of what all these things. It was like for them, all Greek or Chinese to them about what I was talking to you about. And I think this is true even today. While many of the students today are very conversant with how to use social media and are very proficient, and I think they would teach me a thing or two about how it is using. But when I actually talk to them about, what is the configuration, what is the processor that you have, all of them would still give me that same blank look out there. So I feel fundamentally what is lacking in BPharm. I'm not asking that we should be experts in knowing everything about how the operating system works. What is Windows 10? How it works? How are the communication systems? I'm not asking to be but to have a sense of familiarity and about how actually the computer communicates between its different parts and how it actually communicates to the outside world, how you transmit knowledge, where is actually the information being stored within your computer and outside the computer. I think these things are very central that our pharmacy students should know and know it thoroughly well, and not give a blank look when they're asked about all of these very fundamental questions. Okay, coming down now to beyond this, today we see that, I don't think you can do any good research without having a true grasp and a mastery about, languages. And I think we need, though many people may disagree with me, we need to teach some 1 or 2 languages to our BPharm students out there. Because I see that every domain, whether it is pharmaceutics, whether it is pharmacology, whether it is chemistry, today, knowing some level, a good level of decent level of computing and knowing one language today will actually put a student in a very high standing in their, wherever they are, not necessarily research, even in their secular work. If they have such a knowledge and they have a good grasp and a good understanding of what, I think they would excel in their areas of work. Today, I see even in pharmaceutics, the amount of, computational work that is being done is so astounding and at a very high level that it is on par with actually the use of computers even in chemistry. Okay, for example, fluid dynamics. And fluid dynamics is one of the computationally tough areas is being used today in pharmaceutics to understand flow properties of your inhalers, to design inhalers. Even fluid dynamics, computational fluid dynamics today is being used in order to design your paddles, systems, your, dissolution apparatus. So you can understand today what is the level of computational this in not only in chemistry, but even it has pervaded pharmaceutics. Okay. And our students today, BPharm students, are totally clueless about any of these areas. So if today we want to master and progress and do some sort of good research, whether it is pharmaceutics, or pharmacology, or pharmaceutical chemistry, without having a good grasp of computer knowledge, I'm not just talking about switching on your computer and just clicking a few buttons and getting onto the internet. A good level of computer knowledge about the workings of a computer and some computational will stand well in your wherever you are, in whatever area of life you are, whether it is in your, whether you are doing research work, or whether you are doing some work in an industry, or whatever domain you are working on. Now, all said and done, that we should teach a good level of about computers to our students. I know that coding is not everybody's cup of tea today. Today, artificial intelligence and machine learning is very central to whatever we are doing in science today. And today I see that everybody asks you, whether whatever you're doing today, ask you, how much do you understand of artificial intelligence, and how much do you understand of machine learning, and then I will employ. Of course, there is an experimental touch to all of these sciences. I'm not denying out there. But today, computational has become so powerful that computational procedures, computational methods, methodologies have, impacted even the experimental fields. That sometimes in an experimental field, we are not able to get insights. We're not able to understand many things which computational methods can actually draw an insight, give you an insight into. Okay. For example, it is not easy to understand the flow properties and the flow characteristics for example, in your dissolution apparatus. Very difficult. Unless you use Doppler fields, okay, in order to study the flow properties in your dissolution apparatus, which is a very tough area. Today with computational fluid dynamics, I can actually map the flow in every area inside my basket, in my dissolution apparatus, and I can see where are the dead zones, where there is turbulence, what sort of flow properties are there, and I can actually design things very efficiently out there. So you see today, computational methodologies can give insights into some things which are very difficult to answer by just experimental techniques out here. So what am I trying to say? I'm trying to say that if our students were to actually stand in today's area, I think we need to pull them up and to teach a good level about computers and also programming languages out there. Now, how much a student can actually imbibe all of these things and learn all these things, because I know programming is not everybody's cup of tea. It requires a sense of logic, which everybody's minds may not be tuned to that sort of logic and that sort of application out here. But actually, we should expose them. Okay, we should expose them to this area. Maybe they may not be able to pass an examination out there. That is not the thing that I'm trying to stress on. Some will excel and do very well in their examinations in this area. Some may not be able to even to pass an examination. But all that I'm trying to say, I think we should now expose our pharmacy students to some very good level of computers and computer programming. We may not make it mandatory for them to pass those exams and you say to be qualified as a pharmacist, but we need to put in that exposure. And some of them will excel, some of them will automatically take to it and swim like fish in the water. Some of them may not be very comfortable. That's okay, but at least we have taught them and we have told them some things would have got into their mind and into their system. And sometimes or other, when somebody speaks about these ideas, they would be able to say, I learned about it, I heard about it, and it's not alien to me. these things are not what people are talking to about. It's not alien, and it's not some Greek or some Chinese. Okay, at least they would have that sort of familiarity. So while I'm saying that we should introduce computers to a very good degree, we should not make it mandatory. Passing should not be made mandatory, but at least our students should be exposed to this modern technologies. I know there could be a lot of controversy because I am in this field and I'll do a little bit about computers, I'm trying to force these ideas. But this is what I think, and I feel that where we are going to progress in the future, students who have a good grasp of computers will be able to do very, very good in the future.
Yes, I totally get your point, Professor Coutinho. That's really a very important advice. And if we are not exposed to computers by some educational authority, we should definitely try to voluntarily, whoever is again passionate about it, should voluntarily get exposed to the same.